Great. All right. So thank you. Once again, this is Law at the Library in partnership with the Evanston Public Library and the Chicago Bar Association. We continue to be grateful to CBA for their continued support for this public information series. And this presentation, the presentation portion of tonight's program will be recorded and available for later streaming on the Evanston Public Library YouTube channel. And during tonight's program, we'll be monitoring an online chat for questions from the audience for a Q&A following the conversation. So you can type your questions by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens, and we will get to them at the conclusion or just while time allows. So I'm pleased to introduce our speaker for the evening, attorney Fran Baumgart. Fran has practiced criminal law for over 25 years and is the co-chair of the Chicago Bar Association's Criminal Law Committee. And tonight, he will not simply be giving an intellectual explanation of the law, but rather a description of what it's like actually in the trenches. And joining him is his colleague, Thomas Aragost, who
Hello,
is
everybody.
Also a criminal law attorney. And if you want more about his full background, you can find Fran's law firm online at Baumgart and Associates. So thank you again for attending this program. And with that, I will hand it over to Fran.
Thank you. First of all, this is targeted not for the intellectual. This is dog shit simple stuff. It really is. What happens on the street, not what the law is, because the title to this presentation is protests. What the hell is it? Protests. The third thing is what's the title?
Yeah. So the title of today's presentation is Protests, Police Stops, and Navigating the Justice System.
All right. The reason I get hung up on it is because it's so big, it just goes away almost. First of all, let's get some real basic stuff. The first thing is police stops. Skip that for a minute and let's get to protests. Protests, and by the way, this is Tom Yost, who's my second, he's as much as I am. We stumble around together. The reason they call it the practice of law is because the longer you're in it, the more you know. He and I work together to herd cats, as it were. Criminal lawyers think themselves very, very special because they are actually. How many people do you know stand up to the government? Not a lot. The rest are just, well, leave it at that. But the point is, if it's a protest, there's an amendment to the Constitution which allows you, the person, to say whatever you want to say. And as long as you don't start, I can't yell fire in a crowded theater. You can't use words which you know are going to result in a confrontation one way or another, like on the L. But if you're at a protest and you're peaceful, there's no possible way a judge is going to hold you guilty for this. There's a total difference between power and right. Cops have a lot of power. And when I say cops, I mean constables on patrol. Sorry about that. No, really. Constables on patrol. And I have a lot of respect for police because they really do try to do a good job. Most of them. And there's bad ones. There's no doubt about that. No doubt whatsoever. Terrible cops. But there's also the vast, vast majority of good ones. And when I talk, I'm talking respectfully when I use the word cop. It's not a pejorative. It's not a pig. It's a police officer. Anyway, so much of, and by the way, at the end of this, and let's say, what, Mark, 20 minutes, quarter after, 15 minutes before the end, or we're going to have a bunch of questions. So if you have questions, write them down and ask us. But if it's a protest and it's on private land, they can't call the cops and have you arrested for trespass unless they told you to leave, like a school. All right, we're telling you to get out, and if you don't get out, you're going to get arrested. That's on private property. On public property, assuming you have a city permit, which is a totally different field, it's political. But I mean, assuming you have a permit and you're against for whatever, You get to say whatever you want as long as it's peaceful. They can arrest you. They have the power absolutely to arrest everybody. No question about it. But once it gets to court, it'll get thrown out because they don't have the right to do that. Okay. I was asked to give a presentation. So, Tom, whenever you on anything, just jump in. It's not even,
Sure.
I mean, just add something. I mean, if I miss
Sure,
it.
sure thing, sure
Okay.
thing.
The nobody, not I shouldn't say nobody. There are people who wear their jeans down to their thighs and they think it's cool. They really do. They really do think that. So I shouldn't say there aren't people who are so naive they believe it, because some people are that naive. But for you to say to a cop, I demand my rights, or for you to be a smartass to the cops, you're just asking for trouble. The best thing you can do is be extremely polite. They're going to do whatever they're going to do, regardless. When you get to court, get it thrown out if you get an attorney, if he knows what he's doing. And most of the time, the judge will just throw it out, because if you have caused a problem, the cops, it's all passive aggressive stuff too. I was at the 68 convention and I was going back from law school, and I walked across this front of the Conrad Hilton. I thought it was a movie set. There's a guy up there on the bridge with the camouflage suit and the sandbags and a machine gun, literally a machine gun. And there were cops over on the side, and there were the hippies on the left. And all of a sudden it broke. And it absolutely was a police riot, no doubt about it. But last month, we had the same thing, a Democratic convention. I mean, there was always some problems, but I mean, almost nothing. And it's because people have cameras. Hello, cops do not want to be seen doing anything improper. And if you film it, can't be much question about it. I'm going through a bunch of issues which I deal with regularly. Tom and I have both tried a lot of cases to the point where I mean,
I've lost track.
yeah, we have a clue.
You have too, I'm sure.
Right.
We've lost track.
For example, if it's so much of this is common sense. You don't poke the bear.
Exactly.
Just don't. If a cop is an ass, that's the way it is. Just go along with it. It's not going to make that much of a difference once it gets to court. But if you want to get beat up on the street, go ahead. But be clear what the consequences are going to be.
In protest situations, and this is not totally speaking as an attorney, but I was a former policeman. Okay, I handled civil disturbances. I can tell you flat out, and let me tell you, we studied in terms of how to handle a civil disturbance. We studied the 1968 riots for what not to do, and literally most of the civil disturbances that I was involved in that we had to arrest somebody, the person swung first. And that's one thing you can't do as a protester. If you do that, you are gonna jackpot yourself. You really are. You might be facing a felony, you might be facing prison time, and certainly you're going to be facing a battery charge, and these days you might get held in custody without the ability to get out. Now, if it's just you being loud, that's another story. Most of the time, those get thrown out. So,
it really does come down to common sense, but common sense is dictated by how you grow up. All right. If you're always being oppressed, it's totally different than if you take everything for granted, which a lot
right.
Being white, me. Being middle class, me. Having no criminal background, me. I'm fine. They leave me alone. But if you are, and this is almost like initiation, if you go to a prison, if you are a felon, and let me start at the beginning. The British soldiers back in the Revolutionary War used to go through everybody's house because they could. Well, then we had a country and we said, you can't go out, you can't go through somebody's house just because you feel like it. You have to have somebody objectively saying, here's the reason for doing it, probable cause to believe a crime is being committed. A problem with a lot of people who have a felony conviction, even if they haven't done anything in 10 years, if they're fine, is they don't have that constitutional protection that all of us do, which is to be free from a search without a judge looking at it first. If you're on early release, it's the old parole, you waive that right. The probation officer, any cop, again, what I mean by cop is somebody I respect. Every cop can come in and look at whatever he wants to because you waive that right to a Fourth Amendment. I'm going through a bunch of issues which I think would be of some significance, and at the end, we should probably hold it for half an hour, asking questions, because who knows what the audience is here, you know?
Right.
If you're
Agreed.
white, you're middle class, you're black, and you got no money, you're indigent. It's totally different world. Whether, I mean, I don't need to tell people that, but I know it because I'm at the bottleneck. So is Tom and
Yep.
all the other criminal attorneys. And the reason they call it the practice of law is because it is a practice. And the internet has made it made the field completely flat. So anybody who gets out of law school, whether he knows what he's doing or not, or she knows, can say they're heroes. And it's not true. If you've got experience, it makes a huge difference. And the Bar Association, the Chicago Bar Association, CBA, vets its people so that people like Tom or me, who do know what's going on in a particular field, are put out to the public as these are the kind of people, you know, you should go to. What I'm getting to is all of the attorneys have what it's a Facebook page. It's called Cook County Lawyers. But if I don't know how to do something, for example, I don't know on a DUI. On a DUI, you have to take a breathalyzer test and then you get charged with DUI. If you don't take the test, the Secretary of State automatically suspends your license for a year. Well, what if you win that, which I happened to the other day? Pure luck. But the point is I did. Does that mean my guy can drive between now and when he's convicted with DUI? I don't know. So what I do is I go to that site, I put in the problem and I say, has anybody ever dealt with this? And somebody's dealt with it. And they always get back to me. And vice versa. I know a lot of stuff. Tom knows a lot of stuff. I don't know a lot of stuff. If I don't, I know where to go. That's the big deal. Let's see here.
That's why lawyers do research, frankly. If a lawyer says, I don't know the answer, I need to do research, that's because he knows where to look for the look to find the answer, or he knows which colleagues to ask.
And he's more trustworthy if he says, I'm not really sure.
Right.
I mean,
right.
As opposed to, oh yeah.
Or it depends.
I mean, okay. Let me think. So when you go on the internet, you don't know what you're getting. You maybe have a guy who really knows what he's doing. We fight for you and blah, blah, blah. Or you may have a kid who just doesn't know anything. I knew that I knew everything when I got out of law school, you know, and then you realize you don't. But anyway, everybody's trying to make a living doing this, law school wise. Let me think here. If somebody says to me they want me to squash a warrant, I know they don't know what they're doing. You don't squash anything. You quash it. It's just terms that people use indicate what their background is. They've had some smithering of criminal law, or they've been in criminal law all their lives and they're familiar with it. But what am I saying? What I'm saying is that if I went to a dentist, I wouldn't have a mirror checking in my mouth to make sure that the dentist was doing what he's supposed to do. Either if you don't trust a lawyer, don't deal with him. Or if you do, because somebody recommended him, go with him and do what he tells you to do. Not because you should be mindless. It's a stupid thing to say. That's one thing. But I mean, if it's an opinion, it's because he actually has a clue as to what's going on and you don't, because you don't do that regularly. I don't know how to perform an appendectomy. You cut open the body, then what do? I don't know. It's not stupidity, it's ignorance on my part, right? But you learn these things. Anyway, a good example of what people stumble into are, you get stopped by a cop for a traffic ticket. they don't have a right to search your car if it's just for a traffic ticket. If they, and it's so, it goes back and forth. If the cops sit and the cops, they automatically say, is there anything on you that we should be aware of that could hurt us? You know, like a needle if you're an addict or something like that. And you say no, and they claim to feel endangered, then they have the right to search you. But that has to be established once you get in court. Say they find something on you, say they find a gun on you, and you live in a situation where you need to carry a gun, feel you need to carry a gun. They find the gun on you, it can be quashed. That is, it can be thrown out so it can't be used as evidence, in which case the state has no case. That can happen if the Miranda warnings aren't read. We all know what Miranda warnings are because we've watched it on television. You know, the right to remain silent. Well, I shouldn't say we all do. I presume we all do. I used to think, why would people watch the OJ trial? Everybody knows what goes on there. Nobody really did, honestly. Maybe you don't know what the Miranda warnings are. But before I even start telling you that, you have a bunch of rights, and they start. And by start, I mean if they're not delivered, when you get to court, it gets thrown out. All right. But when a cop stops you, if you can say, oh, well, goodbye, officer, I'm leaving now, which you never can do, you're under arrest. It doesn't matter whether you're handcuffed or your hands are behind you or anything like that. If you can't leave that scene, just walk away. If you can't do that, you're under arrest. And so if you say anything, it can be used against you if they've read you their rights. And if they haven't read you your rights and you say it, yeah, I've got a corpse in the back of the car. And they don't read you your rights, then yet that can get thrown out. And that's a really gross out example. But I mean, like,
But it's a true one. That's Larry Eilers. That happened with Larry Eilers. One of his charges was dismissed because the officer starts questioning him and doesn't read him his rights, and he was clearly in custody.
right. And custody, and the cops will always say, no, you're not under arrest. I want you to understand you're not under, that's totally untrue. That's not true. You are under arrest.
Yeah.
All right. And they have to read you your rights. If they don't do it then, and if they don't do it then, and you've told them something, then they can't use it in court. But on the street, as I said, they have complete power. They can do whatever they want. If there's no cameras around, you'd be surprised what happens. But since there are cameras around, it's much more circumspect on the police point of view, or from their point of view. You know, the criminal law has not really changed that much. There's a thing called domestic violence, where you can't beat up your wife. You can't beat up somebody in your family. Well, you couldn't do that beforehand. That was a battery. But now it's a specific crime. Well, they've allotted more police officers maybe to domestic violence cases. But the point is, it's not like we need new laws. It's like the laws that we have can be enforced, or they aren't enforced. And 20 years ago, probably never even occurred to the average police officer that a domestic was anything where you let's let the wife and the husband battle it out and don't get involved. You know, it's a dangerous situation. Whereas now that is looked at differently. Just like when I graduated, there was like 100 people. 6 of them were women. Okay, 6. Now, most of the law students are women. Most of the state's attorneys that I run across are women. Things are changing.
It's gone from in my career, it's gone from about 40% women to now it's about 60% women. So it's a great field for women to go into because to a large extent the work's portable. So if you're thinking about going to law school or thinking about telling somebody to go to law school, it's a great career because it's portable. And you know, people that want to have children, that's great. I was able to basically raise my kids and be a public defender or a private attorney and work from my house 90% of the time when I'm not in court. And it's a different world in that respect. So
I would never, Again, common sense. You don't put people in the middle. You don't have them in a situation where they feel they're being thrown under the bus. You get a case where some kid is fondled, sexually fondled. No judge is going to find, not no judge, but it's, I don't believe that most judges aren't political. They are worried about getting elected, and they should be. They represent the people. And if they let somebody go that shouldn't be let go, they're going to suffer it at the polls. They're not going to be reelected as judge. So I almost never, on a volatile case, ask for a judge to make a decision because I want to put him in the middle. And I know which way he's going to go because he is in the middle. That's the very nature of his job. I always ask for a jury because they don't care. They represent who the people are, basically. And basically they don't, in the sense that most of them are white. Well, that's not true in the city of Chicago. Your average person, isn't like the all white jury. And there's ways to keep that from happening when you select a jury. But you don't want a person who has to be responsible for something making a decision where you know what decision he's going to make because he doesn't want to be on the outside of things, as opposed to a jury who doesn't care. As I said, the law hasn't changed much at all. I remember thinking I was really important because I rushed from one courtroom to the other, and I got the discovery and I got the dates, and that was really important. And now I realize how silly that was. I got plenty of time on my hands. That's why I volunteer in adult reading. I mean, because everything's sent to us attorneys by email. That's body cameras. That's police reports. That's pictures, everything. The only time your attorney physically needs to show up in court is if there's a hearing, of course, or if there's a trial, of course. But the rest is mostly logistics. I get gigabytes of information I have to go through, videos of stores, videos of body cameras. There's always going to be some cop who turns off his body camera. He forgot to turn it on. But that's subject to your cross-examination. Say, come on, give me a break here. What happened? And that's part of what an attorney does. Let me see. I'm trying to think.
More and more court dates are handled by what's called Zoom, just like you're watching this webinar on. A lot of routine stuff is handled by Zoom court or Zoom proceedings. A lot of civil stuff is now being handled that way. In fact, more civil stuff than really criminal stuff. Some of the criminal judges just want to see everybody there, but certainly the civil stuff, it's like almost all Zoom until it's actually up for a trial or a hearing.
And Tom and I, I mean, I don't know about Tom. I have this fantasy. I think he does too. That's why he's doing it, or he's crazy otherwise. That everybody has a right to a trial. You absolutely have a right to a trial. If you don't think that, you can't be a defense attorney.
Yeah.
If they're stupid, if they did it and it's clear, video, the guy steals something from a store and there's a video of him doing it, or there's a rape and there's a security camera and it takes, if the person is wants to go to trial, he has a right to go to trial. They're going to really, really hang him big time. But if he didn't do it, or even if he did do it and it can't be proven, I have the fantasy, and I truly believe this, that you have a right to go to trial.
Absolutely.
You actually are I mean, they say this and it's total BS. I mean, the courts don't really go with this but there's this idea that you're innocent until proven guilty. Well, that isn't really true. It really isn't. I mean, you have to put up bail and bond and all that, which brings us to another thing. But you're presumed innocent until you're proven guilty. Now, you can plead guilty, and there's nothing wrong with pleading guilty. And in fact, it makes a lot of sense if they've got you completely. There's no way you're going to win this case. and you plead and get less time, that makes sense. But if you didn't do it, or if it's totally subjective, I mean, the cop thinks you're a dirty person, all right? That doesn't mean they can prove it just because you get arrested. And there's two things I want to make clear. The best thing you can possibly say, and I'm not talking about a fender bender. I'm not talking about where a cop says, all right, you guys are making too much noise. Get out. The party's over. Go away. I'm not talking about that. But if it's a significant thing, like they take you in for an interrogation, whether it's for fondling a child, carjacking, murder, anything, battery, you beat up your wife beats you up, I don't know. But if they take you in, the best thing you can possibly say, and you should do it absolutely politely and polite all the time, is nothing. I represented a guy who had a one-night stand, a hookup with a woman, never saw her again. A year later, the police come to his job. He's a truck lift, you raise a truck lift operator, okay? They show him this picture. Have you ever seen this woman before? He, of course, because he has a wife, says no. And the trial starts out with, now the first thing you did, Mr. So-and-so, is you lied to the police, didn't you? Well, he did. And he comes across as a liar. I mean, because he was a liar, okay? The best thing he could possibly say, if he's interrogated by police officers and it's serious, is I have nothing to say. My lawyer said, be really polite and say nothing. Don't deny it. Just don't say anything. Say nothing whatsoever. If you saw Breaking Bad, the cop in that case, when he was arrested, he said, I have nothing to say. Nothing. He's an ex-cop because he knows that. And I would say 80% of the people that I represent have given away the farm. They've told the cops. So have you won?
And the other thing is not only say, I don't want to make any statement or I have nothing to say. Say after that, I will not have any questions answered by myself without a lawyer being present, because then they can't try and break you down.
And they do.
And they will. They will. It's the as a police officer, I once got a guy to confess to a rape by offering him a cigarette and a cup of coffee. And honest to God, that's all it took to get him to spill it all. And thankfully they took mercy on him, because it was a little bit more complicated than just I raped her. But it was as simple as that. And I almost didn't want him to make a statement.
And Tom and I disagree on this. He says he genuinely, well, let me tell you what I say. If I were on a jury and a person didn't get on the stand and deny it, even though they're, quote, presumed innocent, which I say is BS, jury doesn't think that if you don't deny it, and the guy doesn't get on the stand and say, I didn't do it, I'd probably find, well, he must have done it. Otherwise, he would have said he didn't. Tom has represented people where, tell him about
it. I've represented many people that have hung themselves by talking, but I've also represented plenty of people who absolutely didn't say a word, and they walked out of there as free persons. But a reality is, I let my client make that decision, and no good lawyer, if they know what they're doing, will ever take that decision away from their client. No good lawyer will ever take the decision away to plead guilty versus not guilty. No good lawyer would ever let the person make a choice between a bench trial and jury trial without advising them, of course. But if they wanted a bench trial, they get a bench trial. They want a jury trial, they get a jury trial. And there are some cases where I advise people to take a bench trial. There are some cases I advise people to take a jury trial. Bottom line is, it's got to be their decision. Now, as Fran said, one of the key things you got to look at is this judge gonna tell the prosecution no? Do they have the courage? Is it the right case for it to say no to that prosecutor? That is a real consideration.
And we're talking politics here when he says
we are.
The have
Yeah.
the,
Is a judge up for retention?
right.
Has the judge gotten, is he up for retention, but he's gotten kind of a negative reputation? That might be a judge who actually says no to the prosecution. You gotta listen to that lawyer. One of the worst things people can do is not listen to their lawyer and do so in a way that makes it real apparent to the prosecutor, because it's like throwing blood in the water to a shark. They will smell it. They will absolutely smell it.
And the lawyer doesn't know what he's doing, or he does. I mean, how many doctors do you know that don't know what they're doing? There's some quacks, no question about it. But the vast, vast majority of cops, of doctors, of lawyers do it because they like it. I would pay, I literally would pay to do what I do for a living. I would do that if I could afford to. I can't. That's
Right?
why I charge.
Yeah.
Same. But you got to be crazy to be a defense attorney. You've got to have that
Well, it
sense.
helps.
Yeah, it helps a lot.
Helps a
Because
lot.
why would people want to get kicked around like defense attorneys are? No, they're evil people and all that bad people. And I rarely represented evil people. It's usually just people who say to themselves, what was I thinking? Boy, that was really dumb. I mean, it's unbelievable what people do. It's about halfway through. Let's see if there's any questions, and if there aren't, we can go on forever, both of us.
There is one. We have had protests that take over roadways. What are our legal rights from a protester perspective? And what are our rights as someone who might be stuck in traffic? Well, that's a pretty good question. Your rights as the person protesting, if
Now, are you protesting, or are you just taking the
if they are blocking a roadway and they're ordered to get off the roadway, they would be subject to arrest if they didn't get off the roadway, regardless of the merits of their cause, regardless of how peaceful they might be. If they're told they have to get off the expressway or what have you, I think the police are absolutely entitled to arrest them. Would much happen to them in court? Perhaps not. No. As the person who is stuck in traffic, one thing you can't do is exercise self-help of, trying to run them over or things like that. I mean, that's clearly something you can't do. The best thing you can do is not incite the situation. If you incite this situation, number one, you might be committing a crime, and you don't want that. You might be committing a battery, or even worse, using a vehicle against someone. That could be attempted murder if they want to press the case, because that's a deadly weapon. But what you can do is you can call the police. You can say, hey, I am being blocked from where I need to go. Can you help me? They will sometimes come out there and they will escort you to where you need to go. And in the more peaceful situations, those people will get out of the way for you, with the police helping you. So that would be the best self-help you could do. Other than that, you don't want to necessarily inflame the situation by honking your horn and yelling back at them, or trying to bump them out of your way with your car, because let's face it, there may be more of them than there are you, and that could result in you getting beat up. So that's not necessarily the best idea. That's a great way to inflame the situation and get yourself hurt.
A lot of it is common sense.
It really is. It really is. Yep.
Let me address two other things. Marijuana. I can smoke marijuana at my at my home. In my home. Okay. I can have a gun in my home if I have a fire owner's identification card, a FOID card. But with marijuana, I can't bring it in a car. I don't mean I can't smoke it while I'm driving my car. I can't have it in the car. All right.
Even if it's not being smoked.
Right. Unless it's in a sealed package which you get when you buy it from a dispensary, but it doesn't smell. The reason I bring this up is this. The question is, and let's get more basic. The cops need probable cause to believe a crime is being committed before they can arrest somebody. Okay. is the fact that you roll down the window. Let me see your license plate, your insurance license. You roll down the window and it smells of marijuana. Is that sufficient probable cause for the cops to search your car? Thomas, I'll agree.
I would say it would be. Right now, this is being hotly litigated
Right.
in our state Supreme Court. The question is that going to go beyond our state? I don't know. In our state, we have legalized marijuana, but what's not legal is transporting it in a way that someone can smell it.
And
So I think that's how the court's going to say. If they can smell it, they got probable cause to say you're violating the law, because the law says you got to transport it in a way that it's an odor-proof container.
Right.
And
what if a friend of yours smokes marijuana in your car and it doesn't go away? I mean, it's
right,
like a smoker. You can get into an elevator with a smoker and tell a person smokes. He reeks of smoke. Okay?
right,
You're in a car and people on other occasions illegally, not you necessarily, but a friend of yours smoked in the car and it stays, the flavor stays in the car. That's the argument against the fact that it's not probable cause.
exactly,
But
exactly.
the law is at this point.
But the reality is, there's lots of people driving around having just smoked a J. And by the way, don't do that, because that's against the law. That's a DUI in this state, actually, or potential DUI. So you don't want to do
Driving
that.
under the influence, not just under the influence of alcohol, under the influence of drugs, DUI. Another
I
thing,
had to mute because my four-legged co-counsel is barking at the neighbors.
I got something I can tell you too. I represent a guy who pulls off the Eisenhower Expressway and accidentally kills a homeless person. He kills him dead. All right. That was an accident. If he had stayed around, as sad as it is, say it's a little kid, doesn't matter. He's dead. But it's an accident. But if you leave the scene of an accident where somebody is injured seriously or just injured at all, so my guy goes to jail for 4 years, literally 4 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Few people know that. Well, I shouldn't say few people. Some people do, some people don't. If you're sentenced to 10 years in jail, that means 5 years. They want the carrot and the stick. They want to be able to have the carrot ahead of you saying, be a good boy, good girl, whatever, when you go to jail, when you go to prison, not jail. Jail is Cook County Jail before trial, which brings up the bail thing. But before we get to that, so they get the carrot and the stick. They tell you if you're a good person you don't violate the rules in the prison, then we'll give you time considered served, half off. But so when you really go in and you don't do anything bad, you just follow the rules in prison, you go in for 5 years, it's 2.5 years. 10 years, it's half of that, 5 years. 10 years, it's half of that. All right. That's, even though nobody knows that, it's oh my God, you got 10 years in jail. Well, he really didn't get 10 years. He got 5 years in jail. Okay.
There's some exception, because some things are 85% service,
Right.
75%, and 100. But murder is 100.
A violent crime, murder 100. Sexual matters, fondling a child, is 85%, not 50%.
Right.
But you choose your poison. What I was going to say is, if you take off and they chase you down, or it takes them a week to find out from all these videos all over that you were hiding out, you do serve time in jail for leaving the scene of an accident. If you kill somebody, as ridiculous as it sounds, if you kill somebody, but you stay there and you're sorry, I mean, not you take responsibility for what you did. It's an accident, but it's a crime if you try to leave the scene. What's another issue, Thomas? What I was going to say is that the law hasn't changed that much. The technology has changed extensively. For example, the jury wants to know, well, if you shot the guy, why didn't they do a fire harm, exposure, what's it called?
Gunshot residue test.
Gunshot resident, a GRS. Why didn't they
Right.
do a GRS on the guy right away if they thought he did it? And if they didn't do it, the jury thinks, well, gee, maybe there's something going on here. Or if the DNA, what about the DNA on the gun? Why didn't they find that? We see it on TV all the time. Well, because it costs a lot of money. That's why. And before there was Zoom, and before there were body cameras, and before there were videos, there were people who were convicted of crimes just as much now as then. Which reminds me, I don't think there's any more child molestation or violent crimes now than there ever was. But for sure, they're being reported a lot more.
Right.
And you got to be really slow.
They're being those allegations are much more likely to be taken serious than it was years ago.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, it's
See,
yeah.
There's another question in chat in the Q&A that I wanted to read. Is a person required to show ID to a police officer if asked for it, regardless of circumstances?
yes, they have
I would say so.
they have a right to stop anybody, not to search them, just to stop and ask for identification. What are you doing here? Okay. 10, 20 years ago, what are you, a white guy, doing here in the projects where it's all black at 2 a.m. in the morning? They absolutely have a right to look at identification.
Yep.
Walking down the street, nothing out of the ordinary. They absolutely have a right to ask who you are and what you're doing there. That's all they have a right to do. They don't have a right to search you. What are you thinking, Thomas?
I'm thinking the same thing. Once upon a time, I was a white-looking guy that served papers in Cabrini Green, and I was dressed kind of like how I am today, in a sports coat and tie and black pants and shoes. And I actually got asked by a police officer for my identification because he didn't understand why I was there. And so he asked me who I was, and I showed him my identification. And by the way, it was the easiest place to ever serve somebody. The people were actually quite nice. But you know, it does happen. It happens to everybody. It happens to everybody.
What else are you thinking? If you get stopped by a policeman on a nothing charge, you know, you went through a light, it's not a nothing charge. You went through a light, you didn't signal, you changed lanes without signaling. Talk to the guy. He's a regular person. But if you are interrogated and you say anything, you are a fool.
Yes.
Absolutely, you are a fool. The worst that can happen is you'll be dismissed if you don't say anything. That's the worst.
Yeah. The traffic stop. What to do? Did you realize you were speeding? Answer: I have no idea. Best answer you can give. I have no idea.
But that's not a big deal. That's
you know, I mean, but it's a question that people have, you know, what to say. I have no idea if I was speeding or not, because unless you've seen it, frankly, it's the truth. Unless you've seen the actual readout on your car while you're doing it, you have no idea what speed you were going, and that's the truth. And that'll actually make it slightly more difficult for that police officer to say, yeah, he admitted he was speeding. So sometimes these police officers are a little bit sketchy with their equipment when they pull you over. You do sometimes your lawyer can do some simple math and prove that if the police officer said you were going that fast, you'd have accelerated to the tune of a Saturn V rocket. So your face would have melted. And then the judge goes, wow, I never thought of it that way. So by saying as little as possible, sometimes you come out okay. So
what else? Let's see. I've represented, and I mean, I've tried not hundreds, but 100 is a lot of jury trials, a lot of trials. So is Tom. And we know what a judge is going to do and what most of the time. I mean, depending on, and you look at the judge, you see, where's he coming from? Is he up for retention? And when I was a state's attorney, tough laws, really tough, right before the election, because,
Yep.
and then after the election, nobody really cared. I mean,
Yeah. Things slacking off. Things
yeah,
slacking off.
it's
Yeah.
not what you think it is. The judge is concerned. I was going to say not with doing justice. That's not true. The judge's first concern is with doing justice. That I take that back. It's not. His first concern is whether or not is this something which is going to get me not reelected? And if that is not going to be a problem, he does justice.
Yeah.
That's cynical,
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah.
the way to go. I mean,
It's a very cynical way of looking at it, but it's an honest way of looking at it. That's very often true. We before we lose our time here, we should talk about what happens when people get arrested and they have to go through what's called, they used to call it bond court, now they call it detention court or first appearance court. And a lot of the same concerns that people would have in a bond court, like, do they have a job? Do they have a place to live? Do they have people that are going to support them through this? A lot of those same considerations are true with detention. There are some things that will be mandatory detention, or at least there will be mandatory. They have to consider detention.
And the first judge you come across is covering his ass. He doesn't know you at all.
Very much so.
Give you a high bond, but he's not going to give you a bond. He's going to hold you in detention.
Right. Because they are scared to death that you will go out or the person accused is going to go out and commit the next offense. Right. And that's what they're looking at. So they're looking at whether you ran from the cops. They're going to look at whether or not you hid from the cops. They're going to look at the person's record, whether they have a similar offense in their background.
Are you a threat of running?
Right. Threat to others in the community is the big buzzword these days.
And are you going to cross the border? Say you're Mexican.
Right.
Do not have citizenship.
Right. Will you flee the jurisdiction and you'll be beyond justice? Yeah.
Are you flight risk?
If you are released and you pick up an offense, I am finding almost 80% they're going to keep you.
Do. Also, you right to a bond hearing. And when I say bond hearing, that's old fashioned. It's not a bond hearing.
Right.
But you have a right to it within 72 hours. And they usually do it the following day.
Right.
You have to.
Right.
And the way they torture you, and it's not torture, but it's the same effect, is you're in a cold room. You are freezing your tail off.
Absolutely.
And nobody talks to you for like 20 hours. And then they come in and talk. Well, you want to get out of there. You don't care what happened. I want to go. I want to go home. Especially if I promise you, just tell us what happened. You can go home. You don't go home. I mean, assuming. All right. There was this bit about if you're a threat to the community, you're going to be held in if you're not a threat to the community, like you're a drug addict. I mean, you're just a hopeless piece of meat. You're not going to hurt anybody. You're just, boy, you get real control. But I mean, if it used to be that if you couldn't make $500 in bond, no lawyer's going to represent you except somebody paid by the state, a public defender. Well, the public defender is paid by the state. So how much of a job are they going to do other than just wait till not a real attorney? They're real attorneys. They absolutely are. But they have like 10 times what I have in terms of people. I mean, they got so many people. Tom knows better than I do because I wasn't a public defender. I was a state's attorney. But
I typically had about 5 times. At one point, I had more when I was assigned to juvenile court in DuPage County. I had more cases than every attorney in the county.
So I mean,
combined.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah,
So
it was an ungodly number of people. It really
Listen,
was.
so somebody sits in jail because they can't make $500 bond, and there are people who cannot do that. There are people who have no income, or they're barely getting by, cannot come up with $500. Most people in our situation have money under the mattress, figuratively speaking. If this stuff hits the fan, there's money there, or there's friends. But I mean, in some cases, there just wasn't. So that's so the people who are helped are those people. The people who are not helped, and I honestly, I've been doing this for 30 years. I don't see any real difference. I really don't.
No, I've seen very little, very little.
Between this bond
Yeah.
safety hearing and a bond hearing,
Yeah.
because the judge is the one who makes the decision. Is this person a threat to the community, or
Right.
is if he's not, we'll let him go. Right? And I've got a guy who has to stay at home. I got a bunch of guys who have to stay at home. They can't go out and look for a job. They can't move. They have a electronic bracelet on their feet. They have the GPS telling who somebody where they go. So they can't leave the house. Well, it's like being in jail. The only difference between my guy being in jail and what he's in right now is he doesn't get beat up. He hasn't gotten raped yet in Cook County Jail. But he's out of county jail. But the restrictions are so great that, he could come up with the money the way
Yeah.
I said, right? But but he could come up with that money, but the guy who came up with $500 is different. I mean, the judges
Yeah.
make the same determinations, whether it's a bond hearing or a detention hearing, as Tom described it.
Yeah, yeah.
Go or they're not.
It really is a lot of the same thought process. We got a question. Many institutions have security personnel. Universities have campus police. Do these non-municipal law enforcement personnel have the same authority to demand ID, etc.? Very frequently, most of the university police are actually sworn law enforcement officers. So yes, they do. They have the same authority as a municipal police person. I have a case right now that I'm still litigating where university police pulled my client over. He is on the grounds of a college. They find on him, in his car, quite a bit of bad stuff. Okay, methamphetamine. Other than the fact that they're held by the same standard of they have to have probable causes, everybody else, they have the
Because
authority
they are
to
law
do that.
enforcement people. Because
Yep,
they are law
yep, they
enforcement.
are absolutely law enforcement people. Now, there are some institutions where all they have is basically security people and not sworn officers. So that some institutions are actually a mix. Most of the state institutions, those are actual sworn law enforcement officers. Many of the land grant colleges are sworn law enforcement officers as well. There are some institutions that aren't land grant colleges that really just have private security.
Does private security have a right to?
That remains an open question. The reality is they usually have signs all over saying, if you do not present identification or identify yourself, then you are subject to being arrested for trespass. And that's their way around it. So look for those signs if you think you're being somehow violated. Reality is they'll call the local cops and arrest you. That's just a second step in the process. So
they have a right to detain you.
They have the right to detain you. Yes.
Until the cops arrive.
Yep. Yep. Most institutions have no trespass signs up somewhere. For example, my daughter, who went to Columbia College, I would go there and I would just act as though I own the place. But there are signs everywhere. I didn't didn't make a hassle, and they'd ask me for my identification. I would gladly show it to them. But the reality is there are trespass signs, and I can't just go freely walking around the place. So
Because it's private property.
absolutely,
You waive
absolutely.
your right to
Yep.
that.
Yep. And there are signs everywhere.
I
So,
also find, and this is again cynical, but I found it to be true, a lot of, what's the euphemism, theft prevention officers,
mhm,
as opposed to wannabe cops,
right,
are wannabe cops. They couldn't get on the police force,
right,
so they're in, so
right.
there are a
Or
lot,
guys that couldn't make it on a police force.
right? So
You know?
they're more aggressive,
Right.
and I don't mean at Macy's particularly or any particular store, but in general, they're much more aggressive than
Right.
they need to be.
Right.
They have a right to call the cops, but they don't do that
Right.
first. Try to. And one other thing, say you have a vindictive neighbor, and I have a client who has a vindictive neighbor who went to the cops. If a private, not a law enforcement officer, if a private person goes into your house and takes coke or whatever and presents it to the police to show you're a dealer, that's perfectly okay. By that I mean they don't need a warrant because they're not a law enforcement officer. They're just a vindictive neighbor. I mean, if it's a law enforcement officer, there's a presumption they have to get a search warrant. If it's not a law enforcement officer, if it's a private person, now you can sue them, in civil court and all that, but the bottom line is you're in jail for it. What other thoughts?
The other thing is though, this actually happened to one of my clients, in one of my clients' cases. The person went into their house, stole the coke or stole a small sample of coke, turned it into the cops. Now the cops charged the guy that went in with trespass.
No good deed goes unpunished.
Yeah, they charged the guy with trespass, believe it or not, and then they cut him a deal so that he could testify against my client. So they gave him immunity. A question was asked: is there such a thing as a citizen's arrest?
And we'll make this one the last question because we got to
Okay.
wrap it up
Okay.
right after this.
Is there such a thing as a citizen's arrest? Yes. What are the circumstances you can do it? So very limited. You probably don't want to go around doing it. No, you don't want to go around doing it. It will more times than not get you charged. If not with a civil suit, you might actually get charged with unlawful restraint.
You make up a criminal case when there really isn't one.
Yeah, yeah. You call the police if at all possible. You call the police.
Another thing,
So
Jesse Smollett, everybody knows who Jesse Smollett is. I have handled at least 3 different false police reports.
yeah,
And they're nothing. It's nothing
Yeah.
at all. He's
Yeah.
at the Supreme Court at this point. I mean,
Yeah.
he's paying a lot of money.
it,
I mean, it's a nothing case.
yeah, it was a nothing case that they should.
So you don't poke the bear.
No,
Some
no,
high profile if you can possibly
Yeah.
avoid.
yeah. That was a bad situation made much worse, in my opinion.
And if you're if you're a high profile deal, your lawyer should be just we'll take a while here to handle this thing. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
the policy goes away.
Don't rush it, and for God's sakes, don't you as a private citizen that's being accused of something ever make a press conference. Worst thing you can do.
Okay.
So,
Mark, thanks a lot.
thank you, Mark.
Hey.
You're a great host.
Yeah, Fran and Thomas, thank you so much for this conversation. This was really insightful. I learned a lot, and I hope that everyone watching was able to learn a lot. This will be up on the Evanston Public Library YouTube page sometime later this week. So
They had a YouTube page. That's great. I didn't know.
yeah, we have all of our past Law at the Libraries as well.
That's great. Wow.
Is it Evanston Library or is it the Chicago Public Library?
It's Evanston Public Library's YouTube page, but they will put this session as well as the ones they
Gotcha.
host. We kind of trade off. Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
I'm
So I'm
Francis.
going to stop the recording first.
Okay.